Well, hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Rudd, President and CEO of the Asian Society. Welcome to our content series of conversations with Asian Americans building America. These folks, all from quite distinct backgrounds, are making a positive impact right across this great country. And today, we're joined by Kathy Fang, chef and co-owner of Fang Restaurant in San Francisco. I'm going to call you Chef Kathy, if that's okay. And she's been crowned champion on the TV show Chopped. I really am impressed by that. By the way, my wife Therese would never allow me anywhere near a kitchen because I would chop myself, but that's a separate story. Now, Kathy, what's your reaction to what you've seen in terms of anti-Asian hate in the headlines in the Bay Area around San Francisco? How does that affect you, and what have you seen yourself?
I'll have to say, when we started to read about all the attacks that were happening, like just locally in areas that we're familiar with, obviously, our first reaction was fear, right? There's fear. There's also anger, frustration, and also confusion too, right? Like how did this city that, my parents immigrated to, that I grew up in, that I was born in, where I honestly have never really felt uncomfortable or fearful of my life or fearful for my parents' life, to come to this point where I have to call my parents and warn them about walking to work, right? Something that we felt that we were able to freely do for the last, 40, 45, 50 years for my parents and 40 years for myself. So there was a lot of confusion. I do have to say that I think the confusion and shock came from the fact that my upbringing and sort of my parents' experience as a whole in the city has been extremely positive, right? Like I grew up in Chinatown. So I grew up in a neighborhood where there are a lot of people of the same race and heritage and culture. So I was always proud of being an Asian American, and being in the restaurant business, we were always exposed to people from other races who came to patronize our restaurant to learn about our culture and to taste our food. So, I've always come from a place where I didn't think about race too much or any sort of negative racial experience. And if I did, which I know I have, I sort of brush it off. And I think it's sort of the same thing with my parents. We've had so much more positive experiences with, the interaction of other races with our race that we brush off any sort of negative experiences.
So for your experience, so Kathy, in your experience, it's kind of relatively recent that you've actually seen this unfold in San Francisco and the Bay Area. If you looked at it over the spread of the last 30, 40, 50 years, in case of your experience and your parents, this is quite an unusual, as it were, outbreak. Is that right?
Right. So I think that's why it was so shocking to us, is because, obviously there's racism that's happened against Asian culture since early 1800s, and it's continued through. But I think for our experience, just our individual experience, we haven't come across it as much. We'll read about it, but it feels a little distant. And we try to think about the positive things, right? Like we try to think about all the positive experiences that we've had. And then we brush off that negative aspect until now, right? Until recently in this last year, where it's something that you just can't brush off, right? Asian people are being specifically targeted and attacked, especially elderly people and in our own backyard, right? It's happening within blocks of where we are. And so I think initially it was really just shock and surprise. There was a little bit of this, what would we do if this continued on? Do we feel safe staying here? And then I realized that the conversation was a little too tough for my dad and my parents to actually discuss. I think they're almost too old, right? My dad was like, I feel like I've built such deep roots here. He's like, even if things were to go crazy, he's like, I can't imagine myself going anywhere else. This is my home now. And so that part was very difficult. It was very difficult to talk to him about it because it's something that I think that my dad wasn't really prepared to discuss and talk about. And so because of that, I kind of shied away talking about this. In fact, this has kind of been the first time I've really openly talked about this, other than with friends, obviously, and people within our sort of closer circle, but not so much in the family. I think it's been kind of a hard discussion within the family.
So you're a second generation chef. I mean, your father is Chef Peter Fang. Hi, Peter. Just tell me a little bit about the family story. How did your folks end up in San Francisco? Where'd they come from? All the rest of it.
So my parents immigrated from Shanghai, both of them. They actually came together like only weeks apart, ended up meeting again, getting reacquainted in San Francisco, got married, had me, and decided to open a Chinese restaurant, just like many other Chinese immigrants, because it's something that they felt comfortable with. They started working at restaurants when they first got here. And my dad always had a passion for cooking, although he was not a professionally trained chef. He then discovered that it was something that he was really good at. And people gravitated towards his personality and the way that he was interacting with people. People like loved the way that he was just like cooking and ordering for people. He was kind of known as the sushi Nazi. For Chinese food, basically, or the soup Nazi. And so the restaurant took off and started becoming notorious for Chef Peter Fang and the extremely long lines. I was fortunate enough to grow up in the restaurant and learn from my dad. I would say I stodged under my dad. I did a lot of free manual labor. It was sort of my daycare. My parents couldn't really afford to send me anywhere. So that was like where I spent all of my time, and also fell in love with food. And more importantly, I think just fell in love with the industry of like meeting different people and interacting with them and connecting with them through food. And so House of Nanking is sort of an institution now. It's been around for 33 years plus. And then I went on and opened Fang Restaurant with my dad back in 2019. Yeah, back in 2019. And then Fang's been around for about 11 to 12 years now. So since then, I've started food blogs and started to appear on television, just sort of eager and always excited to share more about like our history, about our food and our stories.
Well, what a terrific tale, sort of love of China, love of America, love of food, and sounds like you've been pretty good at business as well. So well done on that score. Tell me, how do you feel about being an American? Are you proud of being an American, proud of being an Asian American? Give me a sense of what that feels like.
Yeah, of course. So I would say the first thing I recognize as being is American. And then on top of that, like the extras is that I'm like Asian on top of that, right? And so I feel like I grew up with like all the American values, and then I added some extras from like my own culture, and that's what sort of makes me special. And when I think of America, like why I'm so proud to be American and to be a part of this place is because I think that there's no place like America, right? Like America is actually very diverse compared to anywhere else. And that's something that I think deserves more celebrating, especially during these times where I feel like there's a lot of anti-Asian or anti like other race sort of sentiment that's happening. And I think that's because sometimes we lose sight that the country is great because it's made of all these different people from different countries and races. And we forget that because sometimes we're within our own maybe circle of friends or within our maybe our own culture. I don't know how we kind of got to that point, but that is what's made America so special and so great. As of late and recently, I don't feel like we really celebrate that as much anymore. I feel like people have kind of lost sight of that. And there's a lot of protectionism right now, right? There's this feeling of like, well, there's like, American people, like as in white people. And then there's like the Asian people and like other colored people. There feels to be more of this separation when What made this place great was the fact that we have so many different people here. And I grew up around all of that. And I don't know if that's necessarily the same experience for people living in other parts of this country. Maybe it's not. But that's what makes me proud of America. Like every time I travel, which I love doing and learning about other cultures and seeing other people, it always makes me actually appreciate and be happy to come back because I can appreciate and see the diversity here, which I don't see in other countries.
Well, particularly given that in your restaurant business, you're known as experts in fusion, and the whole business of fusion in cuisine is bringing together great culinary traditions from all over the world into something creative, new and dynamic, which for me is one of the greatest metaphors of what America is at its best. It's bringing together this extraordinary dynamism around the world around a unifying set of ideals, ideas and values. Tell me, if you were speaking now to a bunch of white Americans or white folks like me, what do you think it would be best for them to know about Asian Americans and about the contribution they make to the country that they may not know at the moment, that they may be unaware of at present?
Gosh, I don't know. Maybe I haven't thought about this before, but I would think the best way to share like the types of contribution would be to highlight these individuals, these people from like who are Asian American like myself, who have made an impact or have done things that have impacted our lives, like our daily lives, whether it's a company that's related to tech or in healthcare, scientists, doctors, chefs, business owners, people from all walks of life. How have they actually contributed to the growth and success of this country, right? Like that's probably something that I would share with them. I would know my own story specifically, but I think that would be the best way to like show them that we are all on the same team. We may all look different, and maybe originally we came from different places, but we're all here for the same goal. And it's to make this country a better place for all of us to live in, and to share the same air and water and space.
That's fantastic. So the last question for you is, what gives you most hope for the future, given what you've seen erupt in the last year or so? What gives you most optimism and hope looking to the America of 2021, 2022, 2023? What can we draw on for hope and inspiration for the future?
So when I think of the future, I think of my kids. I have two very I have two young kids, and I think about what would America be like when they grow up, right? When they're 10, when they're 20. And obviously I wouldn't want something like this to happen again, or for them to ever really have to feel like at some point fearful for walking down the street because someone may attack them for like what they look like. And I think what gives me hope is that I myself would want to make an effort to expose my children to as many different cultures. And also, I think like our generation here, we are in control of our own children, right? And we can create movements to influence other people of other races in America to like come together and find ways to educate our younger generation to better understand each other and to have open conversations with each other, to learn about all the different people that make up this country, right? It should be celebrating all these different people and learning about them and how we all coexist together. And that has to come through, our current generation here, like how do we make this happen for our future generations? We can't just rely on like the education system. Like we have to find ways to also make this happen, right? There's education, there's, social media. There's like, if I'm in a place of, let's say influence, right? In a platform where I can influence people, then how can I also use my voice to encourage or to create movements for people to learn more about other stories and cultures. I think only through that would we not look at each other as different people, but as exactly the same. We're all humans inhabiting the same planet. We just come from different places and share different types of traditions and different types of food. But everything else underneath that is exactly the same. So yeah, I'm hopeful that all of us can get to that point. I think we just need to, I mean, I don't know all the answers, but sometimes I think focusing on all the negatives sometimes can create more division, right? Like it is good to highlight all of these things, like so that people know and they're aware and they want to make change. And then the next step is like, how do we create change, right? How do we move from this point forward so that we know that in the future, or the people here right now don't continue down this path? And I'll just put out one example. Actually, yesterday I encountered a racial experience. I was getting medication for my dad at a CVS, and the person was helping someone and then started helping me as well at the same time, even though that person was originally being helped. And the pharmacist was Asian. Immediately, that person jumped to conclusion and was like, oh, you're helping. Why did you decide to help her? Is it because she's Asian? And what actually happened was I had gone in 30 minutes prior to put in the medication. And so when I approached, I had already put in my tag, and he was going to give it to me. And it became this whole thing where it was because of my race. And when I tried to explain to her, she's like, don't talk to me. She was like, I don't need you to talk to me. And it was like, so if there was just a second where she was just like, here, let me explain what actually happened. I'm not skipping the line or anything. And this Asian person didn't just decide to help me because I'm Asian and you're not, right? It all of a sudden became a race thing. And I'm like, why does it have to be that way, right? And if you just give me 1 minute to kind of explain, then this whole thing would be just over with. But some people don't even want to have that conversation, right? They're like, I don't talk.
Yeah, it's a really sad story, and part of the reason we're doing this series of Asian Americans Building America is, frankly, just to give each other a little bit of space, a little bit of time, because the stereotypical answers which people often frame in their own mind when they see something happen are often just completely wrong, and they've been put in their brains by other factors that got nothing to do with you and nothing to do with actually the reality of what's going on in our society, but often stuck in their head by something else that they have seen or heard, usually from complete misinformation. So closing up now, Chef Kathy Fang. Chef Kathy, thank you so much for being with us today. We're grateful for all your efforts in bringing food alive for so many folks right across the United States, right across San Francisco, right across the Bay Area. And to celebrate diversity through food, through cuisine, and celebrating these good things in life. We appreciate all that you and your family are doing for the community. My name's Kevin Rudd. I'm from the Asian Society. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.